There is a great truth that we must never forget. We do not walk this earth alone. No man, no woman, no child stands separate from the great fabric of humanity. Our lives, our struggles, our triumphs, they are bound together in ways we often fail to see. What happens to one of us in some way happens to us all. The pain of the oppressed echoes beyond borders. The suffering of the weak reaches far beyond the limits of their immediate surroundings. And the injustice done in the shadows will, in time, cast darkness upon the light of justice everywhere. We may come from different lands, speak different tongues, worship in different ways, and walk different paths, but our destinies are tied together in an unbreakable chain. The farmer who toils in the field, the worker who labors in the factory, the teacher who shapes young minds, the doctor who heals the sick. All of them, though their roles may seem separate, are essential parts of a whole. If one is weakened, if one is uplifted, all are uplifted. The idea that one man's struggle is his alone, that the oppression of the poor is merely their burden to bear, that the suffering of the forgotten can be ignored without consequence, this is an illusion, a deception that allows injustice to fester and grow. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere because it spreads like a disease. When cruelty is tolerated in one place, it emboldens the oppressor to reach further, to take more, to deepen his grip on those who are vulnerable. When the dignity of one is stripped away, it weakens the very foundation upon which all dignity stands. No nation, no community, no people can truly be free while others remain in chains. For the spirit of injustice is not satisfied with a single victim. It seeks to expand, to consume, to corrupt the moral order that holds civilization together. There are those who believe that if an injustice does not directly affect them, it is not their concern. They see oppression in distant lands, they hear the cries of the suffering, and they turn away, believing that the troubles of others are not their own. But history has shown us that injustice never stays confined to the place of its birth. It moves, it spreads, it seeps into the cracks of society until it reaches the doorsteps of those who once believed they were safe. The chains that bind one man today may bind another tomorrow, and the freedom that is denied to one group may soon be denied to all. It is a false comfort to believe that one can stand idly by while others are deprived of their rights, for in the end, injustice does not ask permission to expand, it simply does. It does not recognize borders. It does not heed the warnings of those who think themselves untouched by it. When discrimination is allowed to fester in one place, it poisons the well from which all drink. When tyranny is accepted in one nation, it sets a precedent for others. When oppression is permitted to go unchallenged, it sends a silent message that wrongdoing will be tolerated, that the powerful may rule without conscience, and that those who suffer must do so alone. We are not alone in this world. We are bound together by a common thread, woven into the great tapestry of humanity. The struggles of the weak are our struggles. The cries of the oppressed are our cries. The fight for justice is not the responsibility of the few, but the duty of all who cherish what is right. A world that allows injustice to persist in one place is a world that endangers justice everywhere. There comes a time in the life of every man and woman when they must choose between the easy road of silence and the difficult path of truth. Injustice does not thrive in the presence of resistance. It thrives in the absence of opposition. It is not simply the actions of the oppressor that allow injustice to spread, but the inaction of those who know better and yet say nothing. The greatest weapon in the hands of the oppressor is not his power, not his wealth, not even his cruelty, but the silence of those who see wrongdoing and turn their heads away. Silence is not neutral. Silence is not passive. Silence is a choice, and it is a dangerous one. When men and women refuse to speak against injustice, they do not merely stand on the sidelines, they stand on the side of the oppressor. To say nothing in the face of evil is to give evil permission to exist. To remain quiet while another suffers is to declare that suffering acceptable. Every moment of silence in the presence of injustice is a moment in which oppression is strengthened, in which wrongdoing is justified, in which the foundation of justice is weakened. History bears witness to the consequences of silence. It tells the story of nations that allowed tyranny to rise because good men and women found it easier to look away. It tells the story of communities that suffered under cruelty because those who could have spoken chose instead to whisper in the corners. It tells the story of those who believed that silence would keep them safe, only to find that injustice does not stop at the borders drawn by the quiet. The cost of silence is always greater than the cost of speaking. The wounds left by oppression are deepened when the world refuses to acknowledge them. There are those who will say that speaking up is dangerous, that raising a voice against injustice invites trouble, invites hardship, invites suffering. But let us ask, is the suffering of silence not greater? Is the pain of watching oppression unfold without resistance not heavier? There is no safety in silence, for silence does not stop injustice, it welcomes it. The oppressor does not fear those who remain quiet. He does not tremble at those who lower their heads. He does not hesitate when he knows that no one will stand in his way. But when voices rise, when truth is spoken, when silence is shattered by the power of conviction, injustice begins to tremble. Oppression cannot survive in the light of truth. Tyranny cannot stand when the people refuse to be silent. The world does not change because of quiet acceptance. It changes because of loud, unwavering courage. Those who suffer do not need our silent pity. They need our loud and relentless resistance. Some will say that one voice cannot make a difference, that one man, one woman standing alone against injustice is powerless. But history tells another story. It tells of moments when a single voice sparked a movement. It tells of times when one refusal to be silent became the rallying cry for millions. It tells us that justice has never been handed freely. It has been demanded by those who dared to speak when others remained quiet. No injustice can persist when the people refuse to be silent. No oppression can continue when voices rise against it. The power of justice lies not in whispered concerns, not in quiet disapproval, but in the unshakable will to speak, to resist, to demand what is right. Those who choose silence may believe they are choosing peace, but peace built on silence is no peace at all. It is merely the calm before the storm of greater suffering. There is a duty placed upon every man, every woman, and every child who walks this earth. A duty not written by laws alone, but carved into the very fabric of conscience. It is the duty to stand against wrongdoing, to resist injustice, to rise when others are beaten down. It is not a duty that can be ignored without consequence. For the moment a person turns away from what is right, they have surrendered not only their voice, but a piece of their own humanity. To witness injustice and do nothing is to accept it. To see suffering and remain still is to be complicit in it. There are those who will say that morality is a personal matter, that it is enough to live righteously in one's own life and leave the struggles of the world to others. But morality that does not extend beyond the self is no morality at all. A good heart that does not act is no better than a hardened one. To be truly righteous is to refuse to stand by while injustice reigns, to refuse to allow evil to persist simply because it is easier to ignore it. No person exists in isolation. We are bound together in this world, not only by shared existence, but by shared responsibility. What happens to one affects all, whether we choose to see it or not. A wrong done to a stranger, left unchallenged, weakens the moral strength of an entire people. A single act of oppression, tolerated, becomes the seed from which greater oppression will grow. And so the burden of action does not rest on the shoulders of the oppressed alone. It rests on all who claim to be just, on all who claim to stand for what is right. There will always be those who believe that taking a stand is someone else's fight, that the weight of justice should fall on the backs of those who suffer most. But to leave the battle for righteousness in the hands of the oppressed alone is to fail the very test of moral courage. Those who are downtrodden, those who are silenced, those who have been cast aside by society, they do not need the quiet sympathy of the comfortable. They need action. They need voices raised beside their own. They need those who have the power to act to do so. Without hesitation, without condition, without waiting for a more convenient moment. There is always a reason to delay. There is always an excuse to turn away. There is always a justification for inaction that sounds reasonable in the moment. But history has shown us that injustice does not wait. It does not pause while we find the courage to oppose it. It does not slow its march while we weigh the costs of resistance. And every moment spent in hesitation is a moment in which injustice grows stronger, in which wrongdoing takes deeper root, in which the possibility of justice becomes harder to grasp. Courage is not the absence of fear, nor is righteousness the absence of doubt. To act in the face of injustice is not always easy. It is not always safe. It is not always without consequence, but the price of inaction is far greater than the price of resistance. Every movement for justice, every victory over oppression, every step forward in the name of what is right has been won by those who refuse to let fear dictate their choices. It has been won by those who understood that morality is not a passive force, but an active one. That to believe in justice is not enough. One must fight for it. The responsibility to act does not belong to the leaders alone, nor to the loudest voices, nor to those with the most power. It belongs to all. The weight of justice is not carried by a few, but by the many. And the moment a person decides that injustice is not their fight, they have already chosen the side of the oppressor. History is not merely a record of what has passed. It is a mirror reflecting the truths of human nature, the patterns of power, and the consequences of silence. It speaks with an unyielding voice to those who will listen, warning of the dangers of unchecked authority and the ruin that follows when people surrender their courage to fear. It tells again and again the story of oppression, how it begins as a whisper and grows into a storm, how it feeds on indifference and thrives in the absence of resistance. And yet, despite the lessons etched into the past, humanity has too often ignored its warnings, allowing the same injustices to take new forms, to wear new masks, to tighten their grip upon the weak and the powerless. Oppression never arrives with a shout. It creeps in on quiet feet. It does not declare itself with fanfare, nor does it come with an open admission of its intent. It enters under the guise of order, under the promise of security, under the justification of necessity. It is the slow erosion of freedoms, the gradual tightening of control, the steady chipping away at dignity. The pages of history are filled with moments when people looked upon early injustices and thought them too small to matter, too distant to concern them, too isolated to be a true threat. And yet, the small wrongs that are ignored become the great wrongs that cannot be escaped. There is no oppression that sustains itself alone. It requires enablers, those who turn their heads away, those who believe it is not their burden to bear. It requires those who excuse it, who justify it in the name of peace, who say that justice must wait for a more convenient hour. The greatest tragedies of human history were not simply the work of the tyrants and dictators who orchestrated them. They were made possible by the thousands who stood by, who convinced themselves that they had no power, who accepted cruelty as the natural order of the world. And yet oppression is never truly unchallenged. For as long as there have been chains, there have been hands willing to break them. As long as there has been injustice, there have been those who refuse to bow to it. History does not only tell the story of the oppressor, it tells the story of those who resisted, those who risked everything to say no more. The great struggles for freedom, for dignity, for the right to live as full and equal beings, these did not come without suffering, nor did they come without sacrifice, but they came because people chose to make them come. The lesson of history is not merely that oppression exists, it is that oppression is not inevitable. It can be fought, it can be defeated, but only when people refuse to let it stand. Those who suffer under the weight of injustice do not have the luxury of waiting for others to decide their fate. And those who believe they are safe from the reach of oppression deceive themselves. For no injustice remains confined to its first victim. The hand that strikes one today will reach for another tomorrow, and the forces that subjugate the weak will, in time, seek to control the strong. The past does not forget. It does not erase the horrors that have come before. It stands as a warning, as a teacher, as an unrelenting voice that calls to each new generation asking them what they will do when faced with the same choices, the same threats, the same injustices, whether they will allow oppression to take root once more, or whether they will rise, as others have risen before them, to break the cycle before it begins again. There comes a moment in every person's life when they must choose between what is easy and what is right. Comfort is a seductive force. It offers security, stability, and the quiet illusion that all is well. It persuades people to stay seated when they should rise, to remain silent when they should speak, to turn away when they should confront. But justice has never been won by those who sought comfort above all else. Progress has never been achieved by those who feared discomfort more than they feared wrongdoing. The arc of history has only ever been bent toward justice by those who were willing to risk something greater than themselves. Courage is not the absence of fear, it is the will to act despite it. It is standing firm when every instinct tells you to back down. It is raising your voice when the world demands your silence. It is stepping forward when the path ahead is uncertain, when the road is lined with opposition, when the weight of consequence presses upon your shoulders. Courage is refusing to accept the world as it is and daring to demand that it becomes something better. The greatest struggles of humankind have never been led by those who sought comfort first. The abolition of slavery, the fight for civil rights, the battle for equality. None of these victories were won by those who hesitated, by those who waited for the right moment, by those who feared the cost of their convictions. They were won by those who stood against the tide, by those who knew that justice demanded more than words, more than wishes, more than quiet hope. Comfort is the ally of injustice. It tells the oppressed to be patient, to wait for change rather than demand it. It tells the privileged that they have no obligation to act, that their comfort is proof that all is well. It whispers that resistance is too dangerous, too costly, too uncertain. But history has shown time and time again that those who cling to comfort in the face of injustice will one day find that their comfort is an illusion, that injustice does not respect boundaries, that oppression does not limit itself to one people, one place, one moment in time. There will always be those who say that the fight is not theirs to fight, that the battle belongs to others, that the weight of justice is too heavy to carry. But courage does not belong to the strongest alone. It does not belong to the powerful, the privileged, or the fearless. Courage belongs to the willing. It belongs to those who, despite their fear, despite their uncertainty, despite the overwhelming forces against them, choose to act anyway. The road of courage is not an easy one. It is marked by hardship, by struggle, by sacrifice. It is a road that demands something from those who walk it, that calls for them to give of themselves in ways they never imagined. But it is also the only road that leads to real change, to real justice, to real freedom. It is the road walked by those who refuse to accept oppression as destiny, who refuse to let comfort be their master. The world does not need more bystanders. It does not need more spectators watching injustice from the safety of their own comfort. It needs those who are willing to step forward, to risk, to fight, to give more than they thought they could. It needs those who understand that the price of justice is never cheap, that the cost of change is never small, that the reward for courage is not comfort, but something far greater. Hope is more than a feeling. It is a force, a fire that refuses to be extinguished even in the darkest of nights. It is the belief that justice is not a dream, but a reality waiting to be built. It is the certainty that no matter how heavy the weight of oppression, no matter how long the road to freedom, no matter how fierce the storm, change is always possible. Hope is what has kept the weary marching, the oppressed resisting, and the forgotten refusing to be erased. Hope is what gives strength to the weak, voice to the silenced, and purpose to those who stand against injustice. But hope alone is not enough. It is the spark, but it must be met with action, with courage, with unity. The most powerful movements in history were not driven by a single voice or a single act, but by the collective will of people who believed that together they could build something better. No great victory has ever been won by one person standing alone. Justice is not the work of the lone warrior, but the force of many hands, many hearts, many voices coming together with a single purpose. The oppressor thrives on division, on the belief that people are powerless, on the lie that injustice is too great to be undone. But history has proven otherwise. It has shown that when people stand together, there is no force strong enough to hold them down. The power of the collective has broken chains, torn down walls, rewritten laws, and redefined what is possible. The greatest changes have always come when the people refused to be divided, when they linked arms in the face of fear, when they stood as one voice and refused to be ignored. There are those who will say that the struggle is too big, that the forces of injustice are too strong, that the dream of a better world is just that, a dream. But hope does not listen to those who preach defeat. It does not wait for the perfect moment. It does not ask permission to exist. It grows in the hearts of those who dare to believe that their actions matter, that their voices count, that their fight is not in vain. Hope does not ignore the pain of the present. It acknowledges it, but refuses to accept it as permanent. It sees injustice not as an immovable force, but as something that can and must be challenged. And when that hope is shared, when it moves from one person to another, when it becomes a movement, it becomes unstoppable. Collective power is born when people recognize that their individual struggles are connected, that their freedom is linked. The forces that seek to maintain injustice want nothing more than to convince people that they are powerless. The force is not sequent. The force is atmosphere. The force is ever. True is the weight of history stands with them. The voices of those who have fought before them whisper in their ears, and the collective power of people united for a cause is stronger than any chain, any wall, any system built to suppress them. Hope is not passive. It is not merely the act of waiting for change to come. It is the force that drives action, that fuels resistance, that turns individuals into movements. It is the realization that no matter how small one voice may seem, when joined with others, it can shake the very foundation of injustice. And when hope turns into action, when it is embraced not just by the few but by the many, there is no limit to what can be achieved. The call to justice is not a distant echo. It is a living demand that rests upon the shoulders of all who witness wrongdoing. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, because the struggles of one are tied to the fate of all. No man, no woman, no nation stands in isolation. Silence in the face of oppression is not neutrality, it is complicity. History has shown, time and again, that those who turn away from the suffering of others will one day find injustice at their own door. The lesson is clear. Justice does not endure where comfort is chosen over courage, where fear is allowed to silence truth, where hope is dismissed as a dream rather than embraced as a responsibility. But if history is filled with the weight of oppression, it is also filled with the triumph of resistance. Every chain that has been broken, every law that has been overturned, every wall that has fallen was brought down not by the hands of a few, but by the power of the collective. When people unite in the face of injustice, when they reject silence, when they choose action over hesitation, the impossible becomes possible. Hope is not merely the light in the darkness. It is the fire that burns down the walls of oppression. And when that hope is transformed into collective power, when it moves from hearts into hands, from whispers into shouts, from passive belief into undeniable force, justice is no longer an aspiration. It is a reality waiting to be claimed.